I'll call out the names of our distinguished panelists and invite them on the stage. First, we have Mr. Rajan Gurukkal, historian, author, professor, Indian Institute of Science, historian, social scientist, and vice chairman of the Kerala State Higher Educational Council, former vice chancellor of the Mahatma Gandhi University. He's known for his interdisciplinary historiography, social theory, and work on knowledge production. He's an acclaimed author who has lectured globally and published extensively with the Oxford University Press. Welcome, sir. Second, we have Radhika Seshan, author, former head of department history at Pune University, the Savitribai Phule University, specializes in medieval Indian trade and maritime networks. She's the author of Empires of the Sea, which has just come out in 2024, and several other books. She's a prolific researcher and has held prestigious fellowships and international collaborations. Please come on the stage. And to guide us through this session, we have Meera Iyer, author, researcher, convener of Intact Bangalore. She has a wonderful book on Bangalore's history, which I would highly recommend. Written extensively on history, heritage, and culture in newspapers. She has a PhD in forest ecology from the Michigan State University. Welcome, Meera. May I now invite Professor Rakesh Basan to present the stoles to our distinguished panelists. So when you make your presentation, the clicker is here, kept out here. Over to you, Meera.
Thank you. Thank you, Chinmay. So at the start, I'd like to thank Chinmay, Disha, Amit, and the other organizers of the History Literature Festival for creating this platform, this space where scholars can interact and can dialogue with and have conversations with lay people such as me. So thank you. So when we talk, our session today is on the ocean of possibilities. So over the last 15 or so years, there has been a huge, an increased interest in Indian Ocean connections globally, as well as in the popular discourse. And if you think about the Indian Ocean, it's ringed by some of the most populous countries in the world. And there have been connections since for several centuries. And yet, and if you look at India, we have like more than 7,000 kilometers long, a coastline that's long. And yet, for the most part, for most of us, we haven't really thought too much about the ocean. As Dr. Seshan has mentioned in one of her books, it's just there, you know. And we haven't really thought about the connections between cultures and communities. So it's great that there is this session dedicated to the ocean of possibilities. And at the start, I'd like to say, although the subtitle is Maritime Empires, I think we'll be speaking more about maritime connections. Is that right? Yeah. So I think it would be good if Dr. Rajan could maybe start and speak to us for a short while about the work that you have done in the Indo-Roman trade. And following which, Dr. Radhika Seshan will speak for a short while, and then we'll have a conversation, and then open it up to the audience. That's the general plan for the next 1.5 hours. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Meera, and my fellow speaker and long friend from JM, Professor Radhika, distinguished scholars and friends. I did a small work on classical Indo-Roman trade, but my project was to rethink that. What is already entrenched in historiography as classical Indo-Roman trade, I thought should be rethought. So the very title of my book is Rethinking Classical Indo-Roman Trade, published in 2015 by OUP, where I literally quarrel with the existing historiography using a new language that constitutes or that renders plausible what is called critical historiography, in which I hesitate to use expressions like trade, money, exchange value, profit, import, export, and so on. Because these things are anachronistic in relation to the kind of socio-economic conditions and political institutions and ideas that had existed. My basic argument is that it was a very vast network of cross-oceanic maritime relations between peninsular Indian west coast and then the whole world of Eastern Mediterranean countries. And that network did not stop with the west coast of peninsular India. It included East Coast Sri Lanka, and then through Tamralipti, the Calcutta area, and then to the Southeast Asian countries, China, and that huge network of, I would say, exchange relations rather than trade. The reason is trade is a technical term that is used in economics as exchange value-based, profit-oriented exchange with a medium that is currency, money, that would have the function of being means of payment and measure of value. As far as I understand, there existed no money function in the deep south, at least, the Tamil region, during the period that I have tried to study. That is from 1st century BC down to 3rd century AD. Now, during that period, largely the societies were pre-state societies, non-monetized, depending upon various forms of exchange such as reciprocity, redistribution, prestations, gifts, and so on. So they never understood what Romans called coins, gold coins or silver coins or gold bullion. They certainly understood the ornamental value of that, the treasure value of it. They certainly formed a part of their valuables, but it was not possible for them to understand Roman coins as coins or money, because these societies were not monetized societies, using money as means of payment and measure of value. That is one point. Then we find in discussions of trade, a lot of neoclassical economics imposed upon. One is the notion of profit. Profit means, as you know, the difference between cost and price. And efforts of traders would be to maximize the difference between cost and price. You don't find that kind of a notion in pre-monetized societies. They don't understand exchange in terms of exchange value. They don't understand exchange as profit-oriented. I'm not going into the details of evidence, but this is what I have understood. And it's not my discovery or anything. A lot of anthropological theories relating to various modes of exchange. Now, my one technical argument is that trade being a technical term which doesn't have synonyms, it has only just one term signifying a concept-related situation. That's not the case with words. Words have synonyms, and the semantic implications are generated by context. A word has world of meanings. That's not the case with the term. Term has very precisely defined semantics. Its meaning is universally accepted and clear. The terms in neoclassical economics, like exchange value, profit, then money, all these are technical terms, and import, export, and so on. For bringing in goods and taking goods out, certainly as words one might be able to use, but if it is a technical thing, that is import as a neoclassical economics term, or say related various ideas, practices, and so on. How much time? Huh? Okay, yeah. Then regarding the political systems, the societies were largely structured by the dominance of agropastoralism. Most of the forms of exchange were relating to that. That means relating to agropastoral resource pooling and resource redistribution. There certainly existed agricultural societies, sedentary agricultural societies. In terms of form of economy, superior in terms of productivity and technology, but that was not able to dominate. So in the past, it need not necessarily be something surplus generating and technologically superior having the upper hand. It was a social formation, an ensemble of multiple forms of subsistence, but structured by agropastoralism, certainly inferior to sedentary agricultural production in terms of technology and productivity. So that's one of the technical arguments. Then naturally, the politics of cattle rates would be important, and you find the whole archaeology relating to that main literature as literature talking about heroism, and a lot of burial monuments in the form of heroic monuments, heroic burials, and so on. So it was some kind of a heroic society having the ideological basis of agropastoral heroism, and the archaeological remains vouch for that. Then what would be the nature of polity? It cannot be state system. It's a pre-state society with different levels of chiefdoms, small chiefs, bigger chieftains, and so on. That's all.
Thank you, sir. Radhika, if you would like to speak a little bit, give us some background to your work.
Okay, Meera, Rajan, whom I have not met for many years, but was my senior in JNU, the organizers of the History Led Fest, and students and friends over here. I am going to take off on a slightly different tangent from what Rajan has been saying, because in the period that I talk of, money is very important. Maybe not money as permeating in every part of the system, but definitely money as value and money as standard of exchange. So my starting point is going to be an inscription, which is located in central, it's found in Badami, Karnataka. And that starts off by saying that the Saliyar weavers and the merchants got together and they granted to the temple 1/10 of the Gadyana, the gold coin, as that was the profit that was accrued on the cloth that they sold to the markets at the coast. So here is a very clear understanding of what constitutes money and exchange. And so when I talk of trade. But we're talking about connections. And there is a very small PPT that I would be using. It's very small. It's only visuals. Okay? Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Okay, I think I'll stand over there. Easier for me to tell you what I'm talking about also. So this is the world of India in the Indian Ocean. And I will take, on a very personal note, I suffered over this map because by the time I got the proportions right, I had so many places crowded in that I didn't know how to show it. So it's also a very selective map because I've had to cut out a whole lot of the places. Anyway, this is broadly India in the Indian Ocean. But the point is that the maritime world is one of connections. So the first part of the connection is the sea itself. Now, on the left of the screen is an image of the Indian Ocean at Kanyakumari. On the right is the Indian Ocean at Bali. It's the same ocean, and these are your connections as well. It's also about rivers. So here, on the left of the screen is the Sundarbans, the Ganga Delta. On the right is Kerala, the backwaters of Alapura. So you've got, again, those kinds of links. And the coast. So on top is It's actually one of my favorite photos because it depicts to me the coast so well. You've got the bullock cart, you've got an anchor, and you've got the sea, and the bullock cart going along the sand. This is on the Konkan coast of Maharashtra. And below that is, well, actually, it's the Bay of Bengal. And this man standing over there, this is near Chennai, and fishing. So it's a coastal fishing. Okay. And then we move to reliefs. So this is a relief in a 17th century temple at Jor Bangla in Bengal. And it shows the Portuguese sailing up the Hooghly. So the detail at the bottom, you know, those funny things that they're holding, those are the Portuguese with their guns. So you've got the image of the Portuguese over here. And then coins. So Satvahan coin on the top, and a King George showing an East India merchant ship of 1940. So again, the ships. And well, this is the work that I've done, which we can forget about for the time being. But this is the world of the ocean. So this is a world of multiple connections, and this connection is maintained by human beings of all kinds. It is also maintained by phenomenal amounts of cultural connections. As in, there's of course language. And I discovered some time ago that, I'd read about it, but I discovered some time ago that the Hadrami network, which moves out of the Aden area, a lot of it is a Sufi, and that the Sufi songs, we find them in Indonesia as well. And the rhythms of those songs are something that many of us have heard in Hindi film music. So those rhythms continue across multiple areas. And with Pushpeshji here, I shouldn't be talking about food, but there is any amount of food that is moving around. Cuisine comes in, overland route as well as sea routes, the importance of fish in the diet, but the importance of coconut in certain diets and the lack of coconut in other gives you your ecology of the coasts. So there are multiple networks that exist. It is into this world that the Europeans come. It is a pre-existing world. And my own work has been primarily on the Europeans. Serendipity or laziness, I'm never sure which it is. But the fact is, post the Portuguese, we've got so many sources, it's easier to work on that. So we look at the sources of the European companies. From the European perspective, the Indian Ocean world consists of only two things. One is pepper, and the other is cloth. But the fact is that the Indian Ocean is much more than that, just this. Much of the existing writing has focused on these two to the exclusion of all else. But the little nuggets that we find, for instance, there's a record which says that the British commissioned a boat to be built in on the Andhra coast, a place called Narsapur. It says that they commissioned a boat to be built, and the letter clearly says that this is a ketch which is made to suit the trading conditions of the Bay of Bengal. So here's yet another dimension. What we tend to ignore when we talk of the maritime world is that there is a technology, there is a connection, there are movements across multiple levels, and most important, there is a connection between the coast and the hinterland. That hinterland, many of my generation, we actually started work on maritime history because of two scholars, Ashin Dasgupta and Michael Naylor Pearson. And on a totally personal note, my own interest in maritime history was only because I was so bored with land revenue, I wanted to do something else. So I went into something else altogether. So I guess my own work is a result of my own boredom, which ought to echo very well with the students over here. It was boredom, pure and simple. And that's where I started. But then as I went in, I discovered so much more to this world. And that has been a journey, but a journey which connects land and sea. I think I'll stop there for now, and we'll get into this.
Thank you, Radhika. So both of you have given us a lot to think about. I'll start with you, sir. So in your work, I think you use, I'd like to speak about sources a little bit. So I think in your work, you use a lot of, you speak a lot about Sangam poetry and about the descriptions of some of the ports as well as some of the products that come in and go out. But of course, you've mentioned how you cannot take these at face value, and sometimes some of the things they speak about are perhaps a little exaggerated. So could you speak to us a little bit about that?
You mean the things brought to the land by the overseas merchants,
Yes.
and then things carried by them. They brought various things, mainly copper, arsenic, tin, and so on, which were required by the artisans and craftsmen here. And then various objects which were their own requirements. These overseas merchants came using the monsoon winds. They had to be here at least for 5 months. By the end of June, early July, they reached. And then towards the end of December, early January, they went back, which meant a long time stay for the overseas merchant, who were mainly Greeks, and then the haulage contractors and ship owners and so on, who were Romans. All these people were not rice eaters, and they all required a lot of wine and a lot of fish fat. They brought wine in their own jars, and then fish fat again in storage jars used by them. Fish fat in garum jars and wine in amphora wine jars. Another thing, that they were in the habit of using dining tables for eating. So certainly they had dining, plates, vessels, and so on. And as most of these people who settled here were aristocrats, ship owners and such people, they used crockery made of terra siglata kind of aristocratic vessels. And you find in such pieces of such items in the ports and port towns that we have excavated. This is often misunderstood as part of the so-called imports. They imported a lot of wine, they imported a lot of fish fat and so on, forgetting the fact that these were items that formed part of the dietary items of the people who came here, and then that they had to stay for about 5 months. Another thing, that they had to take various things. That's for what they came. They came in their own vessels. The technology developed by them. The Greeks were the first to cross the Indian Ocean, right from the Horn of Africa and then the west coast, either to the upper part of the peninsula or directly to the Mujris. Then they all were interested, as already pointed out by Professor Radhika, in the spices of the Indian subcontinent. Pepper from the west coast, mainly Kerala. And in this kind of exchange, people talk about Indian spice trade. Regarding the Indian participation, I have reservations because you cannot use the word India as a state power in those days. It was just a subcontinent with a large number of unevenly developed state systems and chiefdoms. Now, if there is a question relating to that, I'll talk about it. Now, sticking on to the question, the spice items were items of luxuries in the aristocrat of Rome and then the Eastern Mediterranean countries, including Europe. So they were not items used by ordinary people. Now, what actually stimulated this kind of exchange? It's very clear. It involved values and also involved lot of profit to the people who were in the habit of using money, who had the practice of anticipating exchange value and things like that. So Romans were conducting trade, but we were having a relationship of exchange of a different kind.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Seshan, so I'd like to ask you about, so sir has already spoken about some of the items that were traded. So there's a tendency for people to focus on certain high-value, charismatic items and spices, yes, but also textiles, yes. And I know you've written a lot about this. But there was a lot of trade also in everyday products during the period that you study, including rice and I think iron and so on and so forth. Would you like to speak about some of these items and where they went and the connections that we see with that?
Okay. Again, talking of sources, one of our major sources actually is the Portuguese records. Because the Portuguese talk about trying to take over the trade of Basrur because they say that is the premier rice port. And that's where Basrur, which is on the west coast of India, as going out of India. That is 16th century, but I think that also needs to be placed in the context of an earlier inscription, which is the Rashtrakuta time inscription, which says that they tax 57 varieties of rice. So you've got an entire rice culture happening over here, and that is exported. What the Portuguese say is that this rice moves between Basrur and Sofala. And on the east coast, and this is something I need to look into much more, I don't have anything except a family memory, where I remember my great-grandmother grumbling that the good Burma rice is not coming into India in time for a specific festival. I mean, the Tamil New Year is April 14th. Says the good Burma rice is not coming in time, and therefore we can't use that Burma rice for the cooking in our homes any longer. And this is not on the coast. They were in Madurai. So you've got a Burma rice, a knowledge of Burma rice, a time that it comes in. So the seasonality is something that is implied in the records and mentioned in the European records, much more than anything else.
So when you're talking of sources, in addition to the inscriptions, I think one of the most fascinating sources that I'm aware of is the Geniza documents from Cairo. So for some of you may not be aware of what the Geniza documents are. Essentially, these are documents stored by the Jews. So generally speaking, when there is any item on which God is mentioned, any paper, any ledger, any register, any letter, these cannot be disposed of just in trash. They need to be disposed of respectfully. And so most synagogues have a storage space, which is the Geniza. And in most cases, these Geniza documents are cleared out once in a while, and sometimes they're buried. But it so happened that in Cairo, I think it was in the Ben Ezra synagogue, there was a Geniza that was discovered which had documents literally for over 1,000 years. And there's some fascinating tidbits there about connections about traders. And we actually know the names of people who traveled from, say, from Aden to Mangalore, from Tripoli to Patan in Gujarat, and so on and so forth. So I think you've made use of some of this, right, in your work?
Some of it, very little of it actually, because there's so much that one can't really do justice to any of it. But there are these, like she said, fascinating tidbits. There is one, these are among the few documents where we get the names of the traders themselves and the ways in which they lived. Abraham bin Yiju, there's one of those. We've got a record of him staying in Mangalore for 12 years. And at the end of in India, in Mangalore, he married, he purchased a female slave, then he manumitted her, and then he married her. So we've got those records in the synagogue as well, of the manumission and of the marriage. And then, I haven't seen this, but I was told that his will exists in the Cairo records, which says that his Mediterranean trade is to be handled by his wife and family in Cairo, and his India trade is to be handled by his wife and family in Mangalore. So you've got this kind of personal family connection. This is and another story which, again, I find fascinating, is something I was told about by another of the major historians of the Indian Ocean world, Kenneth Hall. He said that he'd come across this letter, which was written by a rabbi in probably Toledo. And this is a letter which has it's inscribed on top, sent by the hand of a trusted man. And he sends it from Toledo to Cairo. And that letter is total family gossip, as in it says that in the time that you have been in the world of the Khan, of the Khitai, because his brother is in China, it says, in the time that you have been in that world, our mother has died, our sister has got married, our older sister has got so many children. I mean, there's a whole bunch of family gossip written in it. But he says, I am sending it by a trusted man who informs me that it will reach you in 1 year's time. So it goes from Toledo to Cairo, from Cairo to Mangalore, from Mangalore to Nagapattinam, from Nagapattinam to Malacca, from Malacca to Guangzhou, and there we've got the reply as well. Comes back the same way. But these are the connections of the world. These are the human connections. And it is these that we find in the sources.
Fascinating. So in the period that you have largely written about, which is, I think, like 1st century BCE till about 3rd century or so CE, do we have any information about the everyday lives of people? What can we say from the sources that you have studied, whether it is the texts or whether it is the archaeological finds? What can we say about the people at that time? You've mentioned already about the camps that used to take place, that used to be here. What else do we know about the people?
Yeah, no, we have the Tamil heroic poems to understand the life of the Tamil region, and which included Kerala as well. People were depending upon various forms of subsistence, agricultural production was minimum. The main activity was agripastoral life, and agripastoral life was characterized by cattle raids. Cattle raids, plundering of agricultural settlements, pooling of resources, and then their redistribution. So that was the kind of social formation. If we take an important port of the time, Muziris, the Kerala coast, Muziris was surrounded by coastal kind of people who were engaged in fishing and salt manufacturing. And then in the red soil area, people were engaged in agriculture and also cattle rearing. And in the whole arid, stony areas, they were occupied by the agropastoralists. This was the life situation. Now, what they had really required, one can imagine. And they certainly collected forest products, including pepper. Pepper was cultivated as well. And they were all sent to the trading center, the port town. And also they brought various other items. And then germs and other objects came from the Western Ghats and then even from Rajasthan and other places. So these were gathered there, and a lot of Himalayan products came through the long distance merchants. So local people's requirement was confined to the ordinary beads and things like that, just like in any marketplace. These were brought there and placed, and that was the nature of the market town of Muziris. And lot of settlements by the overseas merchants. And certainly the rural people might have provided labor for various activities to them.
So what do we know about how the items that were brought in made it to the hinterland? So for example, those of you who are from Bangalore, which I think, how many of you from Bangalore? Okay, so there have been two hoards of Roman coins found in Bangalore. One was found when the HAL airport was being made. So this goes back to 1965, and I think they found around more than 250 coins. And then sometime in the late 1890s, they found another hoard of around 163 coins in Yeshwantpur when the railway station was being expanded there. So what do we know about how these items made it from the coast to such inland places? And a follow-up question on that. You have alluded to this about how this was more a treasure value, but do we know anything else about the impact that all this gold and silver was happening on the local economy, or was there really no impact at all?
Yeah, I mean, responding to the last part of your question, that I don't find any impact possible in the kind of socio-economic life that had existed. So a society which had not attributed money value to these sort of items, other than the values relating to real valuables. Whoever accumulated them could have used either for gifts and redistribution that would have enhanced their status and ranking in contemporary society. Chieftains might have done that. Other hordes were, the hordes themselves talk about the treasure trove value, nothing else. These were stored because these were not functioning as currency in that kind of economy. And if they were not facilitating circulation of labor and then wealth, it wouldn't impact contemporary economy at all. Money can impact economy only when money is encountering unencumbered labor, as Marx said. And then money becomes capital. That could not have happened in that early time. When money becomes capital, that would function in an altogether different way. That would change the character of the polity, character of society, and so on and so forth. So that kind of, as you implied rightly, that did not make any serious impact on the economy, which was the other part of the question.
What do we know about about the connections between the coastal towns and the inland centers?
Yes,
How
yes.
did this operate?
Yeah. Coastal towns were not towns with hinterlands. I don't depend upon, I don't find any relationship between the port and port towns with the villages, the thing, because these villages were not sustaining these towns, so that kind of organic urbanization was not taking place. We call an urban center when the urban center is sustained with the surplus of the villages, and then you call them as hinterland. That kind of relationship did not exist as far as I understand.
Radhika, so I think in the period that you work in, it's obviously an entirely different situation. So what really was this, when we're speaking about maritime connections, there is of course the overseas trade, but one is also talking about coastal trade and also the hinterland, or like the connections between, what I just asked, sir, the connections between the coastal sites and the inland towns. What did that look like? How did it operate? Who was managing these?
For, I think, an earlier period, as in about the 12th century, we get a fair number of inscriptions about the Guild of the 500. And they do seem to have been part of this internal and coastal trade. I think Vijaya Ramaswamy and Meera Iyer have done phenomenal work on this, so I'm not going to touch, but that's one part of it. My own work has been, like I said, on the European sources. And what I get from English and Portuguese records is about how every chief merchant, as they call them, has a network of internal cities with whom they engaged. So there is one which says that this is our chief merchant who has 26 smaller merchants under him who go to all the villages. And if you're looking at Surat, there is, of course, the very famous trader Virji Vora. Virji Vora, 17th century, he and his partner, Abdul Ghaffur, between them owned 40 ships. There are very few people today who own 40 ships, even in partnerships. And they owned 40 ships which regularly traded to the Red Sea and to the Persian Gulf. But what the British were concerned with was not this. It was the fact that they tried to get away from making Virji their major supplier, and they moved to Rajapur. And they discovered that Virji had his agents at Rajapur as well. Then they moved to Karwar and found Virji's agents in Karwar as well. So you've got this connection, merchant-based connection around. We haven't traced it enough because we don't really have too much about this. But there is a hinterland connection. And like I said, money by this time is value, and there is a money economy. Whether it is the Golconda Empire or the Mughal Empire, money economy has permeated. And so there is a very clear knowledge of money as unit of value as well as money as unit of exchange. Both exist. And English, again, European records, talk about in the Vijayanagar Empire having 3 levels of currency. The pagoda, the Fanam, and the Kash. And they say that 80 Kash make one Fanam, and 32 to 36 Fanam make a pagoda. So you've got this unit-wise description as well. It's all very clear. And there is the connection between coast and hinterland.
Okay. On a slightly different topic, so we've been talking a lot about items that came in from some certain parts of the Indian Ocean world. But I'm curious about if there was any connection at all with Africa, with any parts of Africa in both the periods that you'll study. For instance, if we're talking about a prehistoric period, archaeobotanists like Dorian Fuller have talked about how there is evidence of crops that were African origin crops, which are found in India in about 1600 or so BCE. So I'm just curious about connections that we see between places in Africa and the West Coast or the East Coast. So would you like to say anything about that? Okay. No, I was just wondering if there was any connections at all that you could speak about between when we are speaking about the Indian Ocean world. It also includes Africa. So I was wondering whether there is any connection at all. Because in previous, I said that around 1600 BCE, there does seem to be things that are coming in, such as plants and animals that are coming into India. But do we see any such connections in the period that you're studying in?
The traders, overseas merchants anchored at Berenike and unloaded their goods, and using camels, they crossed the desert up to Captos, and from Captos to Alexandria, they used the Nile. That was the way they traveled. I don't find any evidence for bringing, say, African people at that level. But certainly some of the spices, the fans, for example, might have come from the area. But as the overseas merchants were focusing more on goods of demand in the aristocratic world of Mediterranean area, these items did not attract much of the consumers, particularly the chieftains and the related people. You don't find that kind of aristocrats in the area that I am talking about. So that was not having any demand. The only demand was from the side of the bronze makers. So in the rural areas, bronze craft was slowly growing. Even then, that was very limited because in the megaliths, the bronze items are very, very scarce. But anyway, we find such items as part of the items brought by them.
Okay. So one of the things I had in mind, one area that I'm particularly interested in is the Hoysala kingdom. And one very fascinating object that you find in Ethiopia is an image of what looks to be like a typical Hoysala lion, and it's found on a wooden panel in a church in Ethiopia. So we're talking now about the 13th century or so. And of course, much later, we know that the Kachis were very, very prominent in Zanzibar and also other places. So would you like to speak about that a little, Radhika?
Stone Town in Zanzibar has these wooden doors for which we have lists of the orders saying this has to be made. This is a wooden door to be carved to these specifications and taken across to be put in the houses of the Stone Town in Zanzibar. And there is an earlier one which says that blue cloth from the Daman or Sopara region was taken to Sofala. And of course, it's the Portuguese record. So he says that because of our control of the sea, they now open up the weave and they weave a white cloth into the blue. So they get a striped cloth instead. But given the way he himself describes it, it's probably an earlier connection.
Okay. Perhaps we can open up to the audience if there are any questions. Yeah, at the back.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. It was a very enlightening session. My name is Siddharth Rajesh. I am from 6 HEP, Department of ISPH. So, sir, I have a question for you and for you as well, ma'am. Ma'am, sir, my first question to you is, when we speak about trade, there is always a sense of reciprocity that is associated with this, like any economics, not only in neoclassical for that matter. So, what was the benefit that let's say, the stateless societies during the Sangam period were getting from Roman trade? So what was that benefit factor? Because altruism is something that usually we don't talk to when we come to trade. So that's one question for you, sir. Ma'am, my question for you is, during the medieval period, there was a conquest by the Cholas on the Srivijaya Empire. So many nationalist historians have branded it as, let's say, a conquest for power and territory, and also a certain form of alliance by the Khmer dynasty, for the Khmer dynasty, whereas certain Western historians have branded it as something that was there for pure merchant interests and to protect their trade relations with the Song dynasty of China. Which one do you think, as a scholar of authorship, will be more suitable for this? I hope my questions are clear.
Yeah, it's certainly value involved in the exchange. See, when I say there was no notion of profit, I did not mean that exchange did not involve any value. And also, as exchange happened to be a complex systems of exchange, which included trade as well. Greek merchants were trading. And when the Roman ship owners were involved, they were certainly getting huge profit out of the circulation of spices and various other objects brought from the Asiatic world. So that was already there.
I think he also means like what was the benefit to the chieftains here from
Yes. Yeah, chieftains were interested in getting gold for its importance as part of valuables, which a chieftain could have used for exchanging it for his own high status and ranking. So it was not currency, but gold was an item of attraction to strengthen his own status and power through redistribution or through gift exchange.
Okay, about the Shuras. First, there's no such clear-cut distinction between the two. Because motives at any time are always multiple. To define it as one or the other is to do considerable injustice to the time and the space in which they lived. It is definitely a matter of acquiring greater access to and perhaps in due course control over the Indian Ocean trade. Because remember that the Shuras, prior to the move into the Srivijaya, had already accessed many of the coastal areas of the Bay of Bengal. And they did tom-tom themselves as the owners of this. But they also go back to an earlier set which comes from the Satvahans, where they call themselves the Samudradipati or the Tri Samudradipati. That's definitely part of it.
the song, in a broader context, we need to remember that there are three major empires that come up at this time. The Fatimids in Egypt, the Song in China, and the Shoras here. In the enmeshing of these three worlds lies, I think, one major answer to the Shora expeditions.
Thank you for the session. So my question is basically to Dr. Rajan. Sir, you talked about that there was no money involved in the society, so there was no as such impact of money in the socio-economic system that existed in the society back then. So is it because that was not an urban center and those urban centers were not connected to the rural hinterlands as you talk about? Because rural hinterlands were not supplying anything to the urban centers which existed back then. So is it because that money didn't exist, because the reason being that it wasn't an urban center in general? And sir, one more question, sir. How was since you talked about Romans came with the idea of generating profit, they came with the idea of generating value, whereas Indians, it was more about exchange, it was more about redistribution, gifts, etc. So on what basis was the value decided by the Romans or the Europeans between the products that were exchanged? You talked about copper, arsenic, etc. for the artisans, and at the same time, the items that was shipped back to Europe, that is pepper, spices, etc. On what basis were the value decided when the exchange happened or the trade happened?
Yeah, value is decided by the nature of the economy which people were living. Now, our situation was different compared to the socio-economic situation of the Roman world. Now, I told you about the nature of the economy. It was largely an agro-pastoral kind of setup, or even agricultural setup, sedentary agricultural communities dominated by the agro-pastoralists who were engaged in the politics of plunder and cattle raids. So that was the setup. And where you find exchange existing, not in the form of profit-oriented exchange, value-based exchange, but in the form of reciprocity and redistribution.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Good morning, sir, ma'am. It was a very insightful session. So my name is Arvindar, and I am doing my first year in MA International Studies. So my question is to Rajan, sir. So the question is, so it's basically more of a doubt. So you have studied extensively on the Indo-Roman trade and the Sangam period. So my doubt is, so if we see in the Sangam literature, the Romans are mentioned as Yavanas. So, and it was long back, so in 2015, I had read an article on the Hindu, wherein it was written that near Coimbatore, so I'm staying in Coimbatore, so near Coimbatore, Roman bullions were found, and they mentioned that, the traders who came in through the port of Muziris, they, they moved through the Palakkad, and they were going into the Chera dynasty for trade. So, but if we see, so then I started reading about it, but again I could not find how this term Yavanas came into place. But when I read, it was, some say it's from the Prakrit or Pali, but then some say it came from Parsi to Sanskrit. So if you could elaborate how the term Yavanas came in the Sangam literature about Romans.
The Tamil heroic poems certainly refer to Yavanas, but Yavanas is Yavanas. And you see, one of the Pandyan rulers of the time used the Yavanas as their gatekeepers. Yavana damsels came. All these are there. But traders came with a lot of gold. And then they took a lot of pepper back. But how gold worked, how gold coins which worked as currency in the Roman world worked here. That's what I was saying. It was not functioning as money because it came to a it came to a pre-monetized society. It was not based on, based on exchange using money as a measure of value or means of payment. It was not based on money, but they had various forms of exchange. For example, Kuritumar Edirpai. That is, if you borrow 10 mangoes, see 10 years ago, you would be returning 10 mangoes only. Which means they had just notion of gift. And whatever value involved in that, that value existed. But no profit, no notion of interest. Whereas if there existed exchange value-based exchange and notion of profit, 10 years certainly meant very important, because it would mean accumulation of interest and so on. So no notion of interest there, but various other factors involved. That depended on contemporary relations of power, social relations of power. It's very difficult for us to digest it because we all have certain contemporary values, passions, ideas, institutions, and so on, which we cannot push back in time. When you do that, you are becoming a very conventional kind of thinker about the past who runs into trouble of anachronism. Did you get my point? Yeah.
Okay, I'll just add one more thing to it, which is specifically the word Yavana that you were talking about. I have no clue whether this is accurate or not, but this is part of, I guess, family folklore that's passed on, where I was told that Yavana comes from the corruption of Ionian Sea, and therefore Yavana, and that's why it is the Greco-Roman world becomes called the Yavana. Okay, that's basically it.
Jonaka, J and C, Y. These are pronounced in the same way. Jonaka is the term that was current during the later period. When Christians came, the indigenous people referred to them as Jonakas. So the earlier time, they coined the term to any people who came from abroad. So that's the...
Yeah. Hi. So we talk a lot about and we read a lot about these records from Jewish merchants and Portuguese merchants and Roman merchants. Do we have similar kind of record keeping and transcripts from Indian merchants? And if not, then why?
Short answer to that is no. We don't have. Why? I'm sorry, but I'm going to go back to when my children were 2 years old and say because. That's the only answer. Because we don't know why. What we do have is a huge collection of oral communications which we have not mapped yet. And that, I think, is where some of the answer will lie. And I know when we met some of the survivors from the Nagapattinam tsunami, they said that, in Madurai, they said that the youngsters of their village had all died because they did not listen when the older people told them that the color of the water had changed, and therefore something had happened at Kadaram, Keda, which is exactly where the underwater earthquake happened, and that would affect Nagapattinam. This is information. Similar would be in Andaman. In Andaman, nobody from the native population died because they said the color of the water had changed and they moved inland. Now, this is information that we need to collate much more.
Yeah, no, will we be able to ask the question, why television was not available 100 years ago? See, to think about the past is really a very difficult exercise. Your imagination has to be rigorously controlled by methodology. One has to be very, very careful about even using language when you describe the past. What kind of words existed and what these words really meant. All these things have to be very, very rigorously thought about. So now I think in your questions, you are locating yourself in the world of thinking that you are experiencing, going back to 1,000 years, 2,000 years. It's not that easy. So we have to methodologically train ourselves in such a way that we get transported to the life situation of that period. Would be extremely difficult, but at least we should be able to be cautious about not being anachronistic in using words, expressions, and so on. Something that did not exist at that time should be seriously thought about.
So I'm a bit nervous to say anything in case I use the wrong words after Dr. Rajan has said all this. But Radhika, when you just say no, I mean, aren't you? That's a bit of a stretch, right? Because we do have literally thousands of inscriptions which talk about taxes and prices, such as you've talked about before.
We definitely have. We also need to look at the sculptures because they tell stories, and we haven't yet looked at them properly. So no was a very short answer, which is why I started off. It isn't no, it is actually a more qualified, we need to look at this better.
Good morning, respected panelists. I had a question to Radhika ma'am. So ma'am, we have a very rich heritage of our shipbuilding industry. So what I wanted to ask was, what was the extent of the transfer of technology in shipbuilding from India to the world and the world to India along the way until colonization?
You know, transfer of technology is a very difficult question to answer because it happens at so many levels and very often at micro levels where you don't even identify the changes that have come in. The word that is used in English and Portuguese records, the word is a word for a ship. They use prow. Now, prow today is understood as the front of the ship. But the word originally comes from the Malaysian prahu, which is a boat that plies in the Bay of Bengal, as well as in the coastal trade of the Bay of Bengal. How much of the technology is transferred, we have no way of actually determining. And while we do have a lot, we've got a text called the Yukti Kalpataru, which gives us a lot of details about the kind of wood to be used in specific kinds of ship. So it says this wood to be used only for the ferries, this wood to be used when the king is sailing for a short distance on the river, this wood to be used for coastal, and this to be used for across. That some of that has been found in various sculptures. But how much of this was adopted around the Indian Ocean world, we don't know. Like I said, the one clear example is of, quote unquote, making a ship in the Bay of Bengal fashion. That's the only clear indication that we have of this.
So speaking of ships, we have very few shipwrecks, right?
We've got an archaeologist in the audience, Professor Silva Kumar. I think he's the correct person to answer on shipwrecks. I have not studied the shipwrecks myself. What we do have is, we've got the famous Belitung wreck, which is the China, it's off the coast of Singapore. That's in that. There is also the Al Palandan wreck, which has been found off the coast of, I think, the Philippines. and that they're still working on.
There's one near Sri Lanka as well.
Yeah, there's one near Sri Lanka as well. But the Sri Lanka one, haven't seen any of the reports on what has been done with that ship. Alpalandan has been coming out, Belitung has been coming out. I don't know what the others.
Yeah, we have this Godavaya shipwreck, which has, glass ingots and also black and red ware pottery, and also Shatavakana type querns, four-legged querns. That is early. Then we have two examples, one from Kadakarapalli, Kerala, 13th century, but that is an inland ship, which interestingly has Southeast Asian technologies. So hybrid technology in Kerala, 13th century. Then we have a small canoe fragment at Pattanam, 6 meter long in the early historic context. These are the major early shipwrecks. Then we have some in Pumbuhar, colonial period shipwreck, Princess Royal, which was, in Lakshadweep. Thank you.
Regarding the earlier period, now if you would take into account the technology of shipbuilding in the Indian subcontinent, it was abysmally poor. And the main reason was that there was no need of developing a shipping technology and do trade. Overseas trade was unimportant for the subcontinent, and that's the reason why you find it reflected even in religious beliefs and so on. One should not cross the ocean. Now, even now, I don't want to mention his name, there is a director of IIT who believes that he should not cross the sea, even when he had to go to various conferences abroad. He refused just because of this. So you can imagine. Now think about the actual material situation regarding the early trade. The ships were not having huge hulls. They were all coastal kind of vessels carrying goods from one port town to the other just to supply wheat from the wheat growing area to the non-wheat growing areas. Again, focused on port towns. Now, the coasting merchants or sea combing kind of marine traders, they used angular sail, whereas in cross-oceanic ocean, the Greco-Roman ships used rectangular sail, and you find that represented in the Satvahana coin. In this, the ship, you can see, it is not the huge hulled Greco-Roman ship. Huge hulled because they had to bring lot of provisions for their own subsistence. Not to bring in all kinds of goods that would circulate here for acquiring profit. No. So they brought all kinds of things in the huge hulled ship, and they had developed the shipping technology to directly cross the Indian Ocean straight from the Horn of Africa up to Sopara or up to Musaris. It was possible for them. Now, I wouldn't believe that the oceanic winds were discovered by them. They certainly made use of the monsoon winds, and they were able to develop shipping technology that would withstand the rough ocean. We don't find Indian ships going in that period, at least during the December, early January period, accompanying the Greco-Roman ships. No, it was not necessary. Why should you take the trouble of crossing the ocean? Very risky job. You have resources here. They are coming and taking it.
So what about then the inscriptions that we find in the cave in Socotra some of which I think are from the 1st century CE, and most of those are actually in Brahmi. So, suggesting that it was Indians who went there on the way elsewhere. So, what kind of ships would they have been using? Clearly, they were moving across, right?
Yeah, they might have traveled along with the Yavana ships, because they had to make use of the goods that they had, and then they engaged in that. They, I don't think, had commissioned their own ships to do it, because we don't have the references. In the case of Tamilagam, we have mention of kalam. That is the term for ship. And there is an often misinterpreted passage in one of the famous Tamil heroic anthologies, Purananuru. The poem is Mannavan Kudakadal Polantaru Nava Otia Perunkalam Pirage Taneemate. It's very difficult to go behind a ship that gives gold. It's very difficult to go behind a huge ship which brings gold. And people misunderstand that Mannavan Kudakadal Nava is Mannavan, that the chieftain is sailing. It's not like that. Chieftain is owning the sea only. And in the sea, the ship comes. And the context is really funny. The context is, a bard is saying that all big bards have used the beautiful phrases for pleasing you. And now I am in a helpless situation, just like a small boat straining at the least to survive behind a huge ship. That's the simile. The context is that. Nothing to do with the actual trade context. That's...
Okay, thank you. That was lovely. So, I think we'll...
Just one question.
One last question, yeah.
Yeah, just a small question. So when we are talking about trade and exchange, is this happening on a private level or on the level of guilds that are formed? Or does the local chieftain or the state also have a say in the kind of trade that takes place?
We do not know whether a trade was conducted by the guilds of the overseas, guilds of long-distance itinerant merchants. We do not have any clear idea. And as far as I understand, guild is a very inappropriate term to be used. You have to think about various merchant bodies, particularly in the later period, various bodies were there. But in the very early period, one of the early Tamil Brahmi inscriptions refers to a merchant group. So merchant groups did exist, but how the merchant body acted in the whole trade, we do not know. But these bodies had nothing to do with overseas trade. They were all itinerant long-distance merchants coming certainly as caravans. It was not possible for an individual merchant to travel these inhospitable trade routes. So always they traveled together.
I'll just take the liberty to ask Professor Radhika one last question. Professor Rajan mentioned this idea of the taboo against traveling outside, crossing the 7 seas. When does this taboo really begin? Is there some evidence of when this begins?
No, not that I have read, but I do know that it was observed more in the breach than in the reality, because there is this record, again, back to Portuguese, 1560 record, which is in the Goa archives, which is, the captains of the ships had to submit a report every time they finished a voyage and came back. And that particular report says that I saw the ship foundering off the coast of Aden, and so I picked up of course, he also says we had a pass, so we rescued everybody. Presumably, if they hadn't had a pass from the Portuguese, they wouldn't have bothered rescuing. But anyway, they rescued everyone. They took all the goods and the people on board. And he says, I found that one of the passengers on board was an upper caste man, possibly one belonging to the caste of the Brahmins, but it says possibly. And we informed him that as we were at the end of our voyage and they did not eat meat, we would not be able to give him anything because we had only some mutton left in this thing. And we would, if he wanted, we would put him back on shore in Aden so that he could wait for them. So he thought for a while and he decided that in the interests of reaching home safely and quickly, he would eat whatever he had and then do a prashchit. I think in the breach.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. We've learned and traversed lots of centuries and lots of themes in this session. Please remember, India is still one of the world's largest importers of gold. It's not something that happened 2,000 years back, something like $40 billion of gold we are still importing. It's clearly a huge part of the Indian trading history of the last 2,000 years. On shipwrecks, I think lots of students here, it's a fantastic field to get into marine archaeology. Just imagine if you like swimming, if you like scuba diving, you can actually do research underwater and unlock many of these records which may exist out there. This is the session on Indian Ocean, but we have two other sessions actually in this festival which kind of builds on this. One today evening on the opium trade in the 19th century, which is about the India-China trade, again located in the Indian Ocean. And then tomorrow morning, to the question on technology transfer, we have a session on ships again, which we look at Swadeshi transport in the early 20th century. I just want to also mention that we have lovely exhibits on the 8th floor. So if you're going out, when you walk down, please take the stairs, walk down, and there are these wonderful exhibits on a variety of themes. And the book stalls showcasing their books and all the other author books are on the ground floor. So just as you get out of the building, the book stalls are selling the books of the speakers out there. The next session will start immediately. We already have our 3 cartoonists sitting back out there. They're probably been, drawing us right now while we were, chatting on stage. So we're very excited to welcome them. I'll close this session by inviting Professor Rakesh Basant to give our guest speakers mementos. Thank you so much.